Our speaker today is Ralph Epperson, the author of the recently published book, The Unseen Hand, an introduction to the conspiratorial view of history. Mr. Epperson is a graduate of the University of Arizona, but he freely admits that the material for his book has come from information he has learned since college. He informs his readers that he feels he has been taught a series of lies in college in such fields as business, economics, political science, history, and even science. He has read over 400 books on these subjects since college, and he culminated his 22 years of research in the publication of his 488-page book, The Unseen Hand. It is Mr. Epperson's contention that there is a master conspiracy behind the wars, revolutions, depressions, and even the famines of the past. He believes that the goal of this conspiracy is the destruction of man's social institutions such as religion, morality, the family, and nationalism. In their place, he contends that this conspiracy proposes a new world order, a system exactly opposite to today's world order. Today, Mr. Epperson discusses the role of the secret societies in the creation of this new world order. Those who have read his book praise his thorough research and his concise writing style that makes it easy to understand the complex issues of the past. It is with great pleasure that I introduce Mr. Ralph Epperson.
Thank you very much. First of all, let me say before I start that this cassette was being made on April the 9th, 1986, should there be any dated material inside. I don't believe there is, but just for the listeners' purposes, in case there's something that is dated, the tape was made on April the 9th, 1986. A prospective truck driver goes to apply for a job driving an 18-wheeler. The interviewer tells him that he has to solve this problem before he gets the job. The interviewer then poses the problem. He says, you're driving this 18-wheeler carrying a heavy load of steel pipe. You come over the rise doing 70 miles an hour, and down in the road in front of you are a jackknifed 18-wheeler completely blocking both lanes of the highway, a school bus on the right with 80 high schoolers in it, a van on the left with 15 nuns in it, and there are 4 police cars in front of the jackknife truck, all with their lights flashing. Now, what do you do? Well, the prospective truck driver doesn't even pause a second. He says, why, that's easy. I'd wake up Leroy. And the interviewer says, I don't understand. Who's Leroy? And the prospective truck driver says, well, he's my co-driver sleeping in the cab just behind me. The interviewer really gets puzzled and still doesn't understand and says, with all of these problems, why on earth would you want to take precious time to wake up Leroy? The prospective truck driver doesn't even hesitate a second again. He says, why, Leroy is a young driver, and I gotta wake him up because he ain't never seen a crash like this one before. Now, there are a lot of Leroys in America today who need to be awakened, especially about the crashes I'm going to talk about tonight. It is time to wake up Leroy. Even though that story isn't very funny, I believe it is very symbolic. We are the prospective truck driver. The jackknife truck is the future already planned for us, and Leroy is the rest of America. Leroy is asleep, and the planners do not want us to awaken him. And they have been busy concealing the truth from us about how they've jackknifed this truck and hundreds of similar trucks in the past. It is time to wake up Leroy. As you heard, I'm a college graduate, but I don't say that to boast, but to make a point. I used to think that that meant I was educated. It wasn't until about 4 years later that I started learning just how little I had learned that was true. I started reading in 1963 and haven't stopped since. I've read over 400 books on the subjects of economics, history, and political science, and I'll be bringing you some of that research tonight. My reading has convinced me that there is not only a force of good at work in this world, but a force of evil as well. But the tragic thing is that the Leroys of the world do not know this. They are being lied to. Much of what we call history is a pack of lies and distortions. Let's wake up Leroy. Tonight I shall attempt to document the following conclusions. There is a huge, deeply entrenched, extremely powerful conspiracy at work in the world to achieve absolute and brutal rule over the whole human race. This conspiracy is made up of a small group of individuals who control wars, revolutions, and depressions like people control chessmen on a chessboard. These individuals operate in part through secret societies that are created for specific purposes or for specific events. The objective of these societies is to abolish all human institutions, such as religion, the family, and all morality. The secret within the secret, as I will attempt to prove, is that they worship Lucifer or Satan, the devil. By the way, please do not infer that these secret societies are the conspiracy, nor that they are the only method by which the layers above them operate. There are other avenues to total power besides the secret societies. I want to emphatically state the following at the beginning. What I'm going to cover tonight is not commonly being taught as history today, as I believe we're going to see. What I'm going to cover tonight will not convince the die-hard skeptic. I can only introduce the subject and hope that the skeptic will do his or her own research to prove me right or wrong. As you heard, I put my research together into a 488-page book entitled The Unseen Hand, An Introduction to the Conspiratorial View of History. I'd like to start tonight by introducing you to Somerset Maugham, an English novelist. Also, I want to remind you that I'll be using the direct quotations from these people so that you can see that I am not presenting my views, but those of the people involved. Mr. Maugham has one of his characters in his 1939 book entitled A Christmas Holiday say the following: "The people are incapable of governing themselves. The proletariat are slaves, and slaves need masters. There have always been exploiters and exploited. There always will be. And it is right that it should be so, because the great mass of men are made by nature to be slaves. They are unfit to control themselves, and for their own good need masters." Unfortunately, there are truly evil men in the world who believe that, as I believe we're going to see. I once had a discussion with a liberal student of mine who always accused me of finding conspirators behind every bush. I told him that that was because liberals were always putting bushes in front of conspirators. Tonight we're going to remove some bushes. Arthur Edward Wade, one of the leading researchers into secret societies, wrote this: "Beneath the broad tide of human history there flow the stealthy undercurrents of the secret societies, which frequently determine in the depths the changes that take place on the surface." Benjamin Disraeli, English Prime Minister from 1874 to 1880, has also written about secret societies, and here's what he said: "There is in Italy," and by the way, we'll discuss who this is in Italy a little later on this cassette, but Mr. Disraeli has written, "There is in Italy a power which we seldom mention in this house," meaning Parliament. "I mean the secret societies. It is useless to deny, because it is impossible to conceal, that a great part of Europe, to say nothing of other countries, is covered with the network of these secret societies. What are their objects? They do not want constitutional government. They want to change the tenure of the land, to drive out the present owners of the soil, and to put an end to ecclesiastical, meaning religious, establishments. Notice that their two goals are the abolishment of private property in land and the abolishment of religion. We will see that these are the goals of all of the secret societies we will be discussing tonight. I believe that Disraeli had his finger on the pulse of these organizations. There are two and only two schools of history. They are the accidental view of history, and this holds that events happen by accident. No one really knows why things happen, they just do. And the second view is called the conspiratorial view of history, and this holds that events happen by design. People plan wars, depressions, inflations, and even famines years before they occur. Secondly, let's define the word conspiracy out of Webster's. A conspiracy is defined as a combination of people meeting in secret for an evil purpose. Notice that there are three ingredients: two or more people meeting in secret for an evil purpose. Why do evil people keep their plans secret? Because good deeds seek publicity and evil deeds seek secrecy. If the people found out about the plans of this conspiracy, they would not let the conspirators succeed. Also, after the event has happened, the conspirators hire historians to cover up their involvement in the events that they have created. What is the purpose of this conspiracy? Taylor Caldwell, until her recent death, America's finest novelist on the conspiracy, answered this question in her book entitled Ceremony of the Innocent. She has one of her characters say, "We tried to tell them of the conspiracy of international men who want to rule the whole globe, to control its industry, economics, currencies, governments, people, for their own use, and to reduce every nation to the status of slavery under their whips. Power, power." In that quote, Mrs. Caldwell identifies the overall goal of this conspiracy, power. Now, I do not understand the desire for power over others. I do not want power over anyone except myself. But because I do not understand power does not mean that there aren't those who want power over others. We all know all about the Hitlers, the Stalins, the Napoleons, and even the Roosevelts who wanted unlimited worldwide power in the past. If it startled you that I included Franklin Roosevelt in a group of madmen like Joseph Stalin, Napoleon Bonaparte, and Adolf Hitler, let me briefly explain why I included him in that group by discussing Roosevelt's involvement in the Japanese attack on Pearl Harbor that started World War II. The major purpose of that war was to give the world a world government in the United Nations. By the way, the purpose of World War I was to give the world a world government in the League of Nations. The one man who had the most to gain by World War II was Franklin Delano Roosevelt. I believe that the evidence is overwhelming that President Roosevelt had been promised the presidency of the world government that would be created after the conspiracy had ended the war that they had started. The Accidental School of History tells us that the Japanese government attacked Pearl Harbor without warning. But the truth is that the American government, with Roosevelt's assistance, and by the way, I've got to explain, Roosevelt was the Assistant Secretary of the Navy under President Woodrow Wilson during and after World War I. So it's my contention that the American government started forcing Japan into attacking America in 1919 after World War I, 22 years before Pearl Harbor. But no one will believe that President Roosevelt would do such a thing as intentionally sacrifice thousands of innocent Americans on at Pearl Harbor, because he wanted to be the president of the world. Because an American president wouldn't do such a thing no matter what the price. And because we believe that Roosevelt didn't do it in spite of the overwhelming evidence that he did. Now, if you are rejecting my position without reviewing this evidence that I've accumulated that proves my statement, you are proving my point. We will be examining the material tonight that will explain why Roosevelt did what he did. Now, why should we be concerned about power? One individual who answered that question was Benjamin Franklin, who said, "There are two passions which have a powerful influence on the affairs of man. These are love of power and the love of money. When united, they have the most violent of effects." The key to power is money. The conspiracy is aware of this truth, so aptly described as the golden rule. Them as has the gold rules. Why? Lord Acton answered by saying, "Power corrupts, absolute power corrupts absolutely." Tonight I'm not going to cover the more well-known secret societies such as the Council on Foreign Relations, the Trilateral Commission, or the Bilderbergers. There is a wealth of existing information on these groups, much of which is for sale and available today, and also I've covered them in my book, I believe to your satisfaction. I am going to cover some of the secret societies that have been buried by those who write the Accidental School of History. I'd like to start our study tonight with the secret society known as the Order of the Illuminati, founded by Adam Weishaupt in Bavaria on May the 1st, 1776. Professor Weishaupt was a teacher of canon law at the University of Ingolstadt in Bavaria, now part of Germany. What was the purpose of the Illuminati? Weishaupt wrote, "Behold our secret. If in order to destroy all Christianity, all religion, remember that the end justifies the means." Now, what does that mean? There are three ways to get to any goal: immoral means, amoral means, and of course, moral means. Weishaupt was saying that all three methods would be acceptable if they helped you achieve your goal. Moral people cannot use immoral means. Let me give you an example. I hope that you would agree with me that it is a good goal to get as many people as possible to hear this cassette. And we know that it pays to advertise. So what we should do is, after we listen to this cassette, is, if you agree, is buy a can of spray paint and go around the city where you live, spraying every wall with "Buy Ralph Epperson's tape" and then some details. Now, but vandalism is not a moral option, and moral people cannot resort to immoral means to reach a moral goal. The conspiracy would resort to any tool, including murder, if it would further their goal. George Orwell wrote his book 1984, and in it he details how someone is initiated into a secret society that he calls the Brotherhood. An initiate is asked, "Are you prepared to give your life, to commit murder, to commit acts of sabotage which may cause the death of hundreds of innocent people, to betray your country to foreign powers, to cheat, to forge, to blackmail, to corrupt the minds of children, to distribute habit-forming drugs, to encourage prostitution, to disseminate venereal diseases, to do anything which is likely to cause demoralization and weaken the power of the people? Are you prepared to commit suicide if and when we order you to do so?" I would like to ask you to remember that last sentence about committing suicide. We will see an instance where a member of a secret society actually committed suicide when ordered to do so. I believe that this oath that we just read is an accurate copy of the real oath that initiates take when they join secret societies like those we'll be discussing tonight. Weishaupt wrote, "The great strength of our order lies in its concealment. Let it never appear in any place in its own name, but always covered by another name." We are going to see, I believe, that the Illuminati has been involved in America's history since 1786 and is alive and well even today in the United States under other names. I also believe that Weishaupt meant that the Illuminati would infiltrate their organization into other organizations so that they could utilize the second organization's name to conceal their activities. There are 6 goals of the Illuminati. Number 1, abolition of monarchy and all ordered government. 2, abolition of all private property. 3, abolition of inheritance. 4, abolition of patriotism or nationalism. 5, abolition of the family, in other words, of marriage and all morality, and the institution of communal education of children. And 6, the abolishment of all religion. These goals are common to all of the secret societies that we are going to discuss tonight in varying degrees. One of the great questions that I was having trouble answering as I studied this conspiracy was why they wanted to destroy religion. What is wrong with religion? I believe I've answered that question, why the conspiracy wants to destroy religion, and I will be attempting to answer it tonight for you if you wondered as I did. In 1777 and 1778, Weishaupt infiltrated the secret Illuminati into the secret European Freemasonry, and by 1782, he and other Illuminists had indoctrinated the top Masonic leaders in Europe. The order was abolished in 1786 when 4 members broke from it and told the Bavarian government that the Illuminati was plotting to overthrow that government. The Illuminati scattered all over Europe and America, where they started 14 chapters in the United States. In America, they became known as the Jacobins, and I invite you to remember that name, and we'll hear that again a little later tonight as well. 3 years later, in 1789, the Illuminated Masons surfaced when they caused the French Revolution. The group was called the Grand Orient Lodge of Freemasonry, and their intent was to place their leader, the Duc d'Orléans, a member of the Illuminati, on the throne of France. The revolution failed, but France even today considers the day that the Illuminati-led rioters stormed the Bastille prison as their July 4th, their date of independence, and the members of the Grand Orient Lodge are currently filling important positions in the French government. One of America's most visible Masons was President George Washington. In 1798, a Christian minister sent Washington a book that detailed how the Illuminati had infiltrated the Masons, entitled Proofs of a Conspiracy. It is presumed that the minister felt that Washington would be concerned about how the Illuminati had infiltrated his Masonic order. Washington read this book and responded to the minister on September the 25th, 1798. Here's what he said. I have heard much of the nefarious and dangerous plan and doctrines of the Illuminati. It was not my intention to doubt that the doctrine of the Illuminati had not spread in the United States. On the contrary, no one is more satisfied of this fact than I am. The Illuminati had been in America for 12 years when Washington wrote that letter. I want to make a very important point at this juncture. The minister sent President Washington this book because he wanted him to know that the Masons in Europe had been taken over by an alien philosophy. He believed that Washington, not an illuminated Mason, would do something about it. Today there are illuminated Masons and there are regular Masons, your neighbors, your friends, and your relatives who I believe know absolutely nothing about this conspiracy. If you are a Mason and have no knowledge about this conspiracy inside your organization, please pay attention to the information that will follow. And secondly, please do not infer that I am saying that all Masons are involved in the events that we're going to discuss. I am certain that today's overwhelming majority of the Masons are not illuminated Masons. On August the 14th, 1826, Captain William Morgan published a book today called Freemasonry Exposed. The original title was Illustrations of Masonry by one of the fraternity who has devoted 30 years to the subject. Morgan was revealing the secrets of the Freemasons that he was a member of. Morgan tells the reader that during the Masonic initiation ceremony, one of the Masonic leaders presses the initiate's left breast with the point of the compass. By the way, the compass and the square are the two symbols of the Masonic order. And he asks the initiate, "Did you feel anything?" And then the initiator says, "As this is a torture to your flesh, so may it ever be to your mind and conscience if ever you should attempt to reveal the secrets of Masonry unlawfully." The initiate then responds, "I bind myself under no less penalty than to have my throat cut across, my tongue torn out by the roots, and my body buried in the rough sands of the sea at low water mark." I think it is fair to conclude that there are reasons why the Masons do not reveal their secrets. By the way, the Masons let their members know that the Masonic law that will punish them is everywhere, and that they cannot escape nor hide from it. Now, for everybody listening, I would encourage you, if you have one, to reach in your wallet or your purse and bring out a $1 bill and flip it over to the back side. And notice the emblem on the left side. It's a circle with the phrase on the top, Annuit Septis, the eye, the pyramid, and then the phrase underneath, Novos Ordo Seclorum. We're going to be examining the pyramid and the all-seeing eye in a minute, but first of all, I'd like to discuss the phrase on the bottom, the Novos Ordo Seclorum. That phrase is Latin for novos, meaning new, ordo, meaning order, seclorum, meaning world, the new world order. We are currently living under the old world order that supports the family, religion, nationalism, morality, and eternal truths. To create a novos ordo seclorum, a new world order, all of the old order must be destroyed or abolished. That is why the Illuminati wants to destroy the old order, all ordered government, all private property, the family, all morality, and all religion. Weishaupt wanted to create a new world order, a novos ordo seclorum. The pyramid and the all-seeing eye, along with the whole basic design of the dollar bill, are Masonic symbols concealing Masonic truths. These symbols were designed by three Masons in 1789 as the reverse side of the Great Seal of the United States. They did not appear on American currency until 1933, when Franklin Delano Roosevelt, a 32nd degree Mason, placed them there. Let me briefly explain about the Masonic order. There are 32 degrees, and those are earned by the member. The 33rd degree is honorary, and the initiate is invited into that degree. The all-seeing eye above the pyramid on the back of our dollar bill represents, according to the Masons, by the way, notice this is not according to Ralph Epperson, but to the Masons themselves, it represents the ubiquity of Masonic law. I define the word ubiquity in our dictionary, and it is defined as presence in an indefinite number of places at the same time. What is this symbol saying to the Mason? You cannot violate the Masonic law by revealing its secrets. No matter where you go, no matter where you hide, you will be found and punished. And to show you that that was true, less than 1 month after Captain Morgan published his book, he was carried away by a number of Freemasons and murdered. None of the 5 murders of Captain Morgan were ever brought to justice. In response to Captain Morgan's death, and because some in America believed that the Masonic institution was subversive of good government, America's first third party, the Anti-Masons, was formed and ran candidates for the presidency and vice presidency of the United States in 1832. They received 7% of the vote and actually carried the state of Vermont. I'd like to jump now to the 1870s and introduce you to 2 less known but extremely important individuals. The first is Albert Pike, P-I-K-E. Pike's title was Sovereign Grand Commander of the ancient and accepted Scottish Rite of Freemasonry of the southern jurisdiction of the United States of America. The American Masons had divided into a North and a South prior to the Civil War. Pike was also the head of the Illuminati in America. And the second individual is Giuseppe Mazzini, the head of the Illuminati in Europe. I am currently researching the allegation that Mazzini created the Italian Mafia, and that the word Mafia stands for the first letters in the Italian slogan, translated into English obviously. Mazzini authorizes theft, arson, and poisoning. The letter M in the word Mafia stands for Mazzini, the head of the Illuminati, and a co-worker with Pike in many of these secret societies. Pike and Mazzini have revealed a little of the truth about the real nature of the Masonic organizations they were active in. However, one must understand that the real secrets of Masonry are locked up in symbolism and not in history. And even the symbols are concealed. Pike wrote, "The blue degrees, meaning the first 3 of the 32 degrees, are but the outer court of the temple. Part of the symbols are displayed there to the initiate, but he is intentionally misled by false interpretations. It is not intended that he shall imagine that he understands them. Their true explication is reserved for the adepts, the princes of Masonry." Mazzini wrote a letter to Pike on January the 22nd, 1870, and it reads, "We must allow all of the federations, meaning the Masons, to continue just as they are. We must create a super-rite which will remain unknown, to which we call those Masons of high degree whom we shall select. With regard to our brothers in Masonry, these men must be pledged to the strictest secrecy. Through this supreme rite, we will govern all Freemasonry, which will become the one international center, the more powerful because its direction will be unknown." Notice 2 things. Mazzini said that this super rite would govern all Freemasonry. In September of 1985, I went to Tucson's Scottish Rite Masonic Cathedral to do some research for this speech. I am not, and never have been, a member of the Masons, but their library is open to the public, and I went there knowing that. They gave me a pamphlet entitled Dynamic Masonic Workers. On the outside cover it says that the Scottish Rite is the mother jurisdiction of the world. And on the inside cover it says that they are the mother council of the world. It appears that they are claiming to be the governor of all of Freemasonry, the mother council. Secondly, notice that this super rite pledges themselves to the strictest secrecy. Let's just suppose that you asked your friend, a member of the Masons, about this super rite. What would he tell you? I am certain that the majority of the Masons know absolutely nothing about it, and that he'd tell you just that. If your friend did know about the existence of this super rite because he was a member of it, he'd have to tell you it didn't exist because he had been sworn to the strictest secrecy. So no matter what he knew, he'd give you only one answer. It didn't exist. Mr. Pike wrote a book the next year in 1871 entitled Morals and Dogma. Let's read the entire title from the title page. Morals and Dogma of the Ancient and Accepted Scottish Rite of Freemasonry, prepared for the Supreme Council of the 33rd Degree for the Southern Jurisdiction of the United States and published by its authority. Notice that this book is written to explain the morals of the Masonic Order. The teaching of morality is a function of religion. Masonry is a religion. The lodge building in Tucson is called the Scottish Rite Cathedral. We will see shortly just who it is that is worshipped in these Masonic cathedrals by some of the Masons. To show you that Southern Jurisdiction Freemasonry is alive and well here in Arizona, I'd like to read you this advertisement, at least parts of it, that appeared on April the 25th, 1983, on the 100th anniversary of the chartering of the cathedral here in Tucson. By the way, that's my hometown, Tucson, Arizona. Notice that this is not an article written by a staff writer of the newspaper, but is in truth an advertisement written by the Masons. Here's what it says. On December 3rd, 1882, Thomas Caswell, on the Supreme Council for the Southern Jurisdiction, came to Tucson and invested a class of 12 candidates with degrees. On April 25th, 1883, the illustrious Albert Pike, Sovereign Grand Commander, came to Tucson and invested a class of 7 with the degrees. Notice a very interesting thing. It is the second date, April 25th, 1883, the date that Pike came to Tucson, that they are commemorating with their centennial, not the first, which would appear to be their founding date. Their centennial date is April 25th, 1983. They know the significance of Pike's visit. And notice another interesting thing. When Caswell came to Tucson, he gave the class the degrees with the small d. Now, in the advertisement, it says that the word degrees, when they're referring to Caswell's trip to Tucson, it's with a small d. It's not a typographical error. And later on in the same line, it says, but when Pike came, he gave them the degrees with a capital D. Apparently, Pike's degrees are more important than Caswell's. Elsewhere in the advertisement it says, over the years the roles of Masonic organizations have read like a who's who in Arizona. To name a few, Senator Barry Goldwater and Congressman John Rhodes. First of all, Congressman John Rhodes was the minority leader of the House for many years until he retired a few years ago. And Senator Barry Goldwater was, of course, the 1964 Republican presidential candidate. It appears that if you want to be successful in national politics and come from Arizona, it helps to be a member of the Masonic Lodge. Now let's return to Pike's book. Page Roman numeral 4 says this: this book is not intended for the world at large. Even though the public is not to read this book, I got my copy at a used bookstore, and I'd like to urge you to get a copy and read it yourself. It is incredible reading. I'd like to quote some excerpts from Pike's book. Here's the first one. All truths are truths of period and not truths of eternity. This introduces the philosophy known as situation ethics, which teaches that the individual is not to be guided by moral absolutes, but by whatever the individual feels is acceptable behavior at the moment. Put in one sentence, situation ethics can be summarized in this quote from Ernest Hemingway. I know only what is moral is what you feel good after, and what is immoral is what you feel bad after. I wonder how consistent Hemingway would be if someone who agreed with this philosophy, this moral philosophy, approached him with a gun and said, I will feel good after I shoot you. What do you think Hemingway would say to that statement? I don't believe he'd say, well, fire and fall back and enjoy. I just can't believe that. This philosophy, known as situation ethics, was brought into America's schools by John Dewey, father of so-called progressive education. Dewey had written, there is no God and there is no soul, hence there are no needs for the props of traditional religion. With dogma and creed excluded, then immutable truth is also dead and buried. there is no room for fixed natural law or permanent moral absolutes. Notice that Dewey said that there were no permanent moral absolutes. Thou shalt not murder is a permanent moral absolute. But according to Dewey, man does not have to obey that law because there are no moral absolutes. If you want to murder, you can. There are no restrictions. Dewey also wrote that immutable truth is dead. My dictionary defines permanent as fixed and constant. How can that which is fixed and constant not exist? The dictionary defines immutable as unchangeable. How can that which is unchangeable change? By definition, that which is fixed, and that which is unchangeable cannot change. My dictionary defines insanity as a state of being out of touch with reality. Someone out of touch with reality is insane. If I told you that I was Napoleon, you'd say that I was out of touch with reality, therefore I was insane. Dewey said that which is fixed isn't fixed. That which is unchangeable can change. Dewey was out of touch with reality. Dewey was insane. In 1974, a nationwide magazine called Saturday Review asked some of America's leading educators to name the most influential figure in education between the years 1924 and 1974. Their answer was John Dewey. This clinically insane man, according to one response, has influenced the thinking of American educators more than any other educator. Now I believe you can understand why America's schools are having such immense problems. Dewey agreed with Nikolai Lenin, the communist, who wrote, "We, the communists, say that we do not believe in God. We do not believe in eternal morality. Communism abolishes eternal morality. It abolishes all religion and morality." Question: how do you abolish eternal morality? That which is eternal cannot be abolished. Lenin was just as insane as Dewey. Next, I'd like to link Albert Pike, John Dewey, and the National Education Association, the Teachers Union, the NEA. Albert Pike wrote that the Hebrew letter Taw represented the mysterious union of God with his creatures. Another symbol is the letter Pi, a Greek letter, and it represents the symbol for the ratio of the circumference of a circle to its diameter. The two symbols are very much alike if you held them up side by side. Pi is an absolute, an immutable truth, a fixed natural law. Taw is man's union with God. The NEA has a symbol, and I'll have to describe it for you. I have a copy of it in front of me. But basically it's a three-sided triangle, inside of which is a pi or a taw and a red arrow placed on top of or cutting through the letter pi or taw. Now it doesn't matter whether you believe that the symbol in the center is a taw or a pi. And by the way, this is my opinion, not the position of the NEA. They don't tell you what this means. It's a symbol, and this is my opinion as to what it means. The red arrow is education, and it pierces or kills or destroys the pi or the taw, an immutable truth or man's union with God. The purpose of education is to destroy man's union with God or to murder absolutes, just like Pike, Dewey, and Lenin intended. Now let's get back to Pike's book, Morals and Dogma. Pike wrote, "Every Masonic lodge is a temple of religion, and its teachings are instructions in religion. It is a worship." A little later, Pike tells us who the Masons worship. He wrote, "Lucifer, the light bearer. Lucifer, the son of the morning. Is it he who bears the light? Doubt it not." Here Pike identifies the object of their worship. It is Lucifer, also known as Satan, the devil. Now there are some who say that Pike really didn't mean that Lucifer was the object of their worship, that quote is taken out of context. For those that say that, I'd like to read you a letter that Pike wrote on July the 14th, 1889. Here's what he wrote. "To the crowd we must say we worship a God, but it is the God one adores without superstition. You may repeat it to the brethren of the 32nd, 31st, and 30th degrees. All of us initiates of the high degrees should maintain the Masonic religion in the purity of the Luciferian doctrine. If Lucifer were not God, would Adonai, the God of the Christians and his priests, falsely accuse and slander him? Yes, Lucifer is God, and unfortunately, Adonai is also God. Lucifer, the equal of Adonai. The true and pure philosophic religion is the belief in Lucifer, the equal of Adonai. But Lucifer, God of light and God of good, is struggling for humanity against Adonai, the God of darkness and evil. Adonai, by the way, is the Old Testament name for God in the book of Genesis. Lucifer, the God of the illuminated Masons. Now, why do men worship Lucifer or Satan? If you'll remember the biblical explanation of man's creation, Satan tempted man with the fruit of the tree of the knowledge of good and evil. Satan came and offered man knowledge so that they could be as God, knowing good and evil. Satan told man that man could decide what was right and wrong, that he didn't need God to tell him. There are no moral absolutes, no eternal truths, because certain men don't agree with them. That's the way that the illuminated Masons, John Dewey, Nikolai Lennon, and Albert Pike, are thinking. That's why they want to abolish religion. That's why they want to take God out of the schools of America. They want to substitute the religion of Satan for the religion of God, the situation ethics of Satan for the absolutes of God. Now, you don't have to agree with that interpretation of the Scriptures, but I can say this. After 22 years of research into this subject, that is what this conspiracy thinks. Lucifer, Satan, the devil, was a good guy, a benefactor of mankind, who came to free man from the rules, regulations, and laws imposed on him by God and religion. And that's why certain men worship Lucifer. Now let's get back to Pike's book. He wrote, "We hatch no premature revolutions. Said another way, the Masons hatch revolutions when the time is right." Pike also wrote, "Our lodges are said to be due east and west because the master represents the rising sun. The sun, his is the all-seeing eye in our lodges." Some Masons in the Masonic cathedrals worship the sun. The sun brings light and life to man. According to the illuminated Masons, Satan brings light and life to man through reason, the mind, that man is to use to decide what is right and wrong. The sun is the symbol of Masonry. By the way, this next quote is an extremely important one, and I urge you to pay particular attention to it. It's found in Pike's book. Okay, here it is. "It is not true to say that one man, however little, must not be sacrificed to another, to a majority, or to all men. That is not only a fallacy, but a most dangerous one. Often one man and many men must be sacrificed to the interest of the many." The religious concept is, of course, that each man's life is sacred, and that sacrificing one man for the benefit of another is murder. "Thou shalt not murder" is a moral absolute, unless you believe that there are no moral absolutes, and then murder becomes acceptable behavior. The thinking that the individual may be sacrificed allows the secret societies to hatch revolutions or wars that will murder millions so that they can achieve their goals. Remember, the ends justify the means. For instance, this conspiracy murdered 13 million in World War I to give us the League of Nations. They murdered 40 to 60 millions to give Russia the horrors of communism. They murdered 50 million to give the world the United Nations after World War II. And they murdered 60 to 80 million in China to give the Chinese the terror known as communism. All because one man may be sacrificed to the many. And secret societies were involved in each of these disasters. If my research is correct, that Franklin Delano Roosevelt planned Pearl Harbor years in advance, and that as a 32nd degree Mason, he certainly should have read Pike's book entitled Morals and Dogma, and if he agreed with Pike that there were no moral absolutes, that the words "Thou shalt not murder" were just empty words, and if he agreed with Pike that one man, if not many men, could be sacrificed to the interest of the many, and if he believed that the ends justified the means, it is not unreasonable to conclude that Roosevelt could have planned World War II years in advance so that he could become president of the world. Now let's get back to Albert Pike's book. He wrote, "The world will soon come to us, the Masons, for its sovereigns, meaning governmental leaders, and pontiffs, meaning religious leaders. We shall be the rulers over the masters of the world." I believe he was saying we shall be the secret power behind the government. Since that was written, many presidents of the United States have had their rulers, their secret advisors who really ran their administrations. For instance, Woodrow Wilson had Colonel Edward Mandell House, Richard Nixon had Henry Kissinger, and Jimmy Carter had Zbigniew Brzezinski. Colonel House, Henry Kissinger, and Zbigniew Brzezinski, all three were members of secret societies. No fewer than 8 Catholic popes have condemned Freemasonry since 1717. One, Pope Leo XIII, charged the Masons with aiming at the overthrow of the whole religious, political, and social order and the establishment of a state of things based on pure naturalism. Naturalism is defined as the denial of the supernatural in religion. If you overthrow the whole religious, political, and social order, you must replace those items with a new world order, a novus ordo seclorum. Notice that the Pope was saying this about all Masons, and in fact, up until 1983, no Catholic could join the Masonic order. In 1881, a Masonic Congress held at Milan, Italy, I believe at the request of Giuseppe Mazzini, quote, decided to create by Masonic initiative one great politically nonpartisan anti-clerical party whose object would be to fight and destroy clericalism by any and all means, unquote. Some of the Masons are out to destroy clericalism, meaning religion. I'd like to briefly mention Karl Marx, the so-called father of communism. Marx was born Jewish and his family converted to Christianity when he was 6. Yet during his college years, Marx wrote, "I wish to avenge myself against the one who rules above." What changed his mind? He joined the highly secret Satanic Church. Marx's long hair and unkempt beard were characteristics of the disciples of Joanna Southcott, a satanic priestess who considered herself in contact with the demon Silo. Marx later wrote that the abolition of religion as the illusory happiness of man is a demand for their real happiness. The communists openly declare that their ends can be attained only by the forcible overthrow of all existing social conditions, including religion. If you overthrow all existing social conditions, you must replace them with some new social conditions, the novus ordo seclorum, the New World Order. The Communist Party surfaced in 1847, and the Communists themselves tell us the Communist League sprang from what was known as the League of the Just. The latter was an offshoot of the Parisian Outlaws League founded by German refugees in that city. From being German, the League became international. Question: are the German refugees who formed the Communist League in 1847 the scattering members of the Illuminati formed in 1776 who were refugees of Bavaria, now part of Germany? I believe that they were, not so much because of the actual links between the two, because there's 70 years of difference between the two organizations, but because of the continuation of the same philosophy. The League commissioned 2 of its members, Karl Marx and Friedrich Engels, to write what we today call the Communist Manifesto, but it was originally called the Manifest die Kommunistischen Partei. In German, that means the Manifest of the Communist Party. It was published in February of 1848. Today, young students all over the world believe that the brilliant Marx sprang from obscurity to write the Communist Manifesto. But in truth, he was asked to write a party platform for a group already in existence under various names for over 70 years the Illuminati. For 20 years after it was published, the name of Karl Marx did not appear on the manifesto. The League wanted the document out by February the 1st, 1848, so that they would have their platform in print for the revolutions already planned to start on March the 1st, 1848. And on March the 1st, Europe exploded with violent revolutions all the way from England to Russia. The accidental historians have recorded that these revolutions spontaneously erupted all over Europe at the same time. But the truth is that the Communist League, the successor to the Illuminati, was behind them all. None of these revolutions succeeded, so the League withdrew and placed Marx's name on the party platform, now called the Communist Manifesto. Let's move now to the United States, where in 1837 the European bankers planned America's Civil War. Let me repeat that. In 1837, the European bankers planned America's Civil War. They created a secret organization known as the Knights of the Golden Circle. Their purpose was to go to the southern states and spread secession. They were obviously successful, and the war started in 1861. Amongst the members of the Knights were Jefferson Davis, head of the Confederate States, John Wilkes Booth, the assassin of Abraham Lincoln, and Jesse James, the notorious outlaw and a 33rd-degree Mason. During the Civil War, President Abraham Lincoln contended with a group called the Radical Republicans, frequently called the Jacobins. The Jacobins were formed by the Illuminati in 1786. The cause of the Civil War was not, and I repeat, not slavery. As we have been told by the Accidental School of History, it was over the issue of a central bank. The basic purpose of the Civil War was to force the American government to do one of two things. Either borrow money from the European bankers at 24 to 36% interest a year, or to create a privately owned national bank that had the power to print paper money, made legal tender by the government, and then loan it back to the government at interest to pay for the cost of the war. But Lincoln did neither. He created the debt-free, interest-free greenback that was not borrowed from anyone. Lincoln had outfoxed the European bankers, and he had to be eliminated. And as you know, John Wilkes Booth assassinated him on Good Friday, 1865. John Wilkes Booth, member of the Knights of the Golden Circle, created by the European banking fraternity. Booth was allowed to escape Washington, D.C. by Secretary of War Edwin P. Stanton, who had strong ties to the Jacobins, the Illuminati. Stanton later killed another man, a captain in the Southern Army, in the barn that we've heard so much about, and then he certified that the body killed in that barn was that of John Wilkes Booth. The real John Wilkes Booth died in 1903 when he was 65. And there's a picture of his mummy in Life magazine in July of 1938. The article that accompanies this picture says that doctors in 1938 examined this mummy and that it had a shorter left leg, which they had concluded had been broken in the past. It is known that the real John Wilkes Booth had broken his left leg when he jumped to the stage after shooting President Lincoln. The article says that he committed suicide by taking arsenic, and that he had taken so much of it that he had actually embalmed himself with it. The owner of the rooming house where Booth was staying found the body so well preserved by the arsenic that he actually kept it as he found it. And it showed up in 1938 in this traveling show, and the pictures of which are in that Life magazine. I believe the truth is that John Wilkes Booth was asked to commit suicide in 1903 by Jesse James, fellow member of the Knights of the Golden Circle. Booth was drinking too heavily and was revealing his true identity in violation of the oath he took when he joined the organization that had protected him for 38 years. He was asked by Jesse to drink a glass of orange juice laced with arsenic. Remember the oath written about by George Orwell in his book 1984. Are you prepared to commit suicide if and when we order you to do so? You did not fool with the Knights of the Golden Circle. As an example of how the historians of the Accidental School of History have buried the Knights A book entitled The Assassination and History of the Conspiracy was published just months after the Lincoln assassination. It makes the statement that the Order of the Knights of the Golden Circle originated the plot to assassinate Abraham Lincoln. Yet current historians rarely mention this group. The Knights have been officially buried. President Andrew Johnson, Lincoln's successor, had no doubt that there was a conspiracy afoot amongst the radicals, meaning the Jacobins, to incite another civil war. And there is evidence that this was indeed their plan. The Knights of the Golden Circle created a group called the Ku Klux Klan after the Civil War. Their purpose was to create racial tension between the blacks and the whites after the war was over to provoke a second civil war. There were at least 2 black and white riots in Memphis and New Orleans where hundreds were shot. And to pay for the costs of this war, Knights of the Golden Circle member Jesse James was in the West stealing gold and then burying it. I'd like to now briefly move to Russia and the Russian Revolution of 1917 by introducing this thought. This is a quote from a book called Before the Storm, written by a Russian. After the defeat of Napoleon and the occupation of Paris in 1814 by Russian troops, many Russian aristocrats visited France. The liberal ideas of the French Revolution appealed to many of them and resulted in the formation of 2 secret Masonic lodges in Russia. Both lodges enlisted as members many influential and wealthy Russian nobles. Another author, George Katkoff, has written that there is no doubt that a widespread net of conspiratorial organizations modeled on Freemasons' lodges worked for revolution in Russia and played a decisive role in the formation of the first provisional government. The communist Lenin took over the Russian government and abolished private property and made atheism the official religion of Russia to show his adherence to the beliefs of the Illuminati that preceded him. Next, I'd like to discuss the September 1977 issue of Esquire magazine, which introduced the reader to a secret society at Yale University called Skull and Bones. The author called it the most influential secret society in the nation. He says, I do seem to have come across definite, if skeletal, links between the origins of Bones' rituals and those of the notorious Illuminati. The chapter is a chapter of a similar organization in a German university. It is interesting to remember that the Illuminati had its origins at the University of Ingolstadt in Bavaria, now part of Germany. One researcher into the order, Professor Anthony Sutton, has written that the activities of the order are directed towards changing our society and the world to bring about a new world order. By the way, I add, not Mr. Sutton, but Professor Sutton, but I add a Novus Ordo Seclorum. But now Sutton adds one last statement. He says, this will be a planned order with heavily restricted individual freedom. Perhaps you've heard of some of its more famous members. The conservative William F. Buckley, Jr., Vice President George Bush, and former ambassador to Russia, Averell Harriman. Adolf Hitler joined a secret society in 1923 called the Thule Society, Thule. The original members of the Nazi Party were drawn from this group. It is in the Thule Society that one has to look for the real inspiration of Nazism. In the Nazi cosmology, the sun played a prime role as a sacred symbol of the Aryans, in contrast to the moon, revered by the Semitic peoples. Hitler saw in the Jewish people, with their black hair and swarthy complexion, the dark side of the human species, while the blonde and blue-eyed Aryans constituted the light side of humanity. Hitler undertook to extirpate from the material world its impure elements to lead it back to glory. The inner core within the Thule Society were all Satanists who practiced black magic. The swastika is a religious symbol representing the sun, and there are 2 forms of it. The leftward rotating swastika represents goodness. By the way, here in Arizona, the leftward rotating swastika was on our highway signs up until 1939 or 40, when the rightward rotating swastika appeared in Nazi Germany. The people in Arizona have forced the highway department to remove the sign because it was a swastika. But as I say, it was the exact flip over opposite of the right rotating swastika. The left rotating swastika represents goodness. The right rotating swastika almost universally represents evil. Hitler personally selected the symbol for the Nazi Party by selecting the right rotating version, even though he knew the meaning of the two versions. Here's what the Bible says about sun worship. Deuteronomy 17:2-5. If there be found among you any man or woman that hath gone and worshipped other gods, either the sun or the moon, such is an abomination. One of the most recent secret societies to surface is the Italian Masonic group known as P2. P as in Petunia, -2, the number. It surfaced in 1981 when it toppled the government of Premier Arnaldo Forlani and attempted to replace it with an authoritarian government. I have two articles in front of me. One was dated May the 27th, 1981. It's captioned, Ties to Authoritarian Plot, Topple Italian Government. Another newspaper article appeared about 3 or 4 days later on May the 31st, 1981, and it reads, Italy's Masonic scandal widens as Dew's books involve high aides. It's all about the P2 organization. The articles reported that membership lists showed 953 names, including politicians, bankers, military officers, and over 100 Catholics assigned to Vatican City in service to the Pope. P2 is the successor to P1, created by Giuseppe Mazzini, the head of the European Illuminati. Perhaps the P1 and P2 Masonic lodges are the super right of Italy's Masonic organization. According to author David Yallop in his book In God's Name, the P2 group was involved in the murder of Pope John Paul I, the Pope who served only 33 days. He was the Pope just before the current Pope John Paul II. Yallop details the evidence that any or all of 6 key suspects had strong motives to kill the Pope. All 6 were members of the P2, 2 cardinals, 1 bishop, 2 bankers, and the head of P2 itself. He states that the P2 is active in the United States and that it has interlocks with the Mafia and the CIA. The Pope had discovered a fraudulent deal wherein the Church had bought $1 billion, with a B, $1 billion worth of phony bonds. The bankers in the P2 were transferring $1 billion out of the Vatican. One of his first acts as Pope was to start working on plans to remove all of these individuals, and he died with those papers in his hands. Yallop writes, the circumstances of his death and the discovery of his body make it abundantly clear that the Vatican perpetrated a cover-up. There was no autopsy, and the Pope's body was immediately embalmed. The papers have disappeared. By the way, his successor, John Paul II, has not made any of the changes that his predecessor was going to make, and the Pope has dropped the canon law that excommunicates the Catholic Mason. Perhaps as you remember, actress Grace Kelly died on September the 14th, 1982, when her car went out of control and plunged off a cliff. As you know, Grace married Prince Rainier of Monaco, a nearby neighbor of Italy, and the place where the P2 group frequently met. There are charges being made in Europe today, that Princess Grace, a Catholic, was murdered by P2 because she had discovered the fraudulent $1 billion deal and the P2 organization. They claim that the brakes on her car had been tampered with. It is known that immediately after the crash that killed her, her car was covered with a tarp by the police from Monaco, removed, and then crushed into a block of scrap metal. Her car crashed in France and was removed without France's permission and before it could be examined by French police. One of the indications that Grace was murdered is the fact that Princess Grace's brother, Jack, and her brother-in-law died on Philadelphia streets within blocks of each other and within hours of each other on March the 2nd, 1985, of so-called heart attacks. Both were carrying on their own investigations into Grace's strange death. In about 3 years, the nation will be marking the bicentennial of the writing and ratification of the Constitution of the United States. Liberals have created 2 organizations to urge the American people to enact major changes in the U.S. Constitution itself. The 2 organizations are the Committee on the Constitutional System, which includes at least 2 members of the secret society known as the Council on Foreign Relations, C. Douglas Dillon and Robert McNamara. The second organization is called Project 87, and its honorary chairman is Chief Justice Warren Burger of the Supreme Court. One of the options that both of these groups have is the adoption of a new Constitution already written. I've got a copy of it, and it's been labeled the New Constitution, although I don't believe it has a title. It was written by the Center for the Study of Democratic Institutions, founded by Robert Maynard Hutchins. Mr. Hutchins was president of the University of Chicago, heavily funded by the Rockefeller Foundation, and he was a director of the Ford Foundation. The new Constitution abolishes the 50 states and replaces them with between 10 and 20 republics. The president would be allowed to run once and for a term of 9 years. The Senate would be appointed rather than elected. There would be no right to keep and bear arms, no Fifth Amendment to protect us against self-incrimination. The government would be empowered to abridge freedom of expression, communication, movement, and assembly in a, quote, declared emergency, unquote, and the term is not defined by the new Constitution. And this is only a partial listing of the incredible provisions of this new Constitution. We have a strong warning from the past about keeping our Constitution just as it is. It comes from Daniel Webster. Hold on to your Constitution. Miracles do not cluster. What has happened once in 6,000 years may never happen again. Hold on, for if the American Constitution should fall, there will be anarchy throughout the world. Many of these secret societies have, as we've shown, as their base, a worship of Lucifer or Satan the devil. In a book entitled The Secret Teachings of the Ages, author Manly P. Hall quotes the oath the initiate takes when he becomes a member of the Satan-based secret society. We're going to listen to it, or as I read it, together. Now, I don't know whether or not the listening or the reading of this oath formally binds the reader to a pact with Satan. But in the event that it does, I urge you to join me now in renouncing the oath and Satan before we read it together. I do not want to be responsible for converting hundreds into Satan worshippers. Here's the oath. I hereby promise the great spirit Lucifer, prince of demons, that each year I will bring unto him a human soul to do with as it may please him. And in return Lucifer promises to bestow upon me the treasures of the earth and fulfill my every desire for the length of my natural life. If I fail to bring him each year the offering specified above, then my own soul shall be forfeit to him. And then the signer signs the statement with his own blood. Question. Is the annual offering of a human soul to Lucifer the reason that so many young people are disappearing now in America? As you know, these children are rarely found, and of course, if they were sacrificed and then cremated, as is required by this ceremony, and the Satanists were sworn to secrecy, who's going to tell the police? And secondly, how would they later find the body? I have in front of me a 1985 article that appeared in our newspaper in Tucson. It's entitled, or it's captioned rather, Ohio Devil Worshippers Sacrifice Children, Authorities Told. Now, how are Satanists going to recruit new members into their satanic cult? One way is through certain types of rock and roll music. Groups today openly promote Satan worship in their music. One rock and roll group, for instance, calls itself KISS, K-I-S-S. Now, we're supposed to look at that and think, isn't that sweet? KISS meaning the meeting of some lips. Isn't that a nice thought? But that's not what it means at all. And by the way, they openly tell us this. We don't have to interpret this. This is what they tell us. KISS, K-I-S-S, Knights in Service to Satan. But there is a far more insidious method to recruit young people. It's called backwards masking. Certain words, when played backwards on a record, say things that the same words played forward do not say. So the musicians locate these words and string them together so that they can say things the conscious mind doesn't hear. Experts now claim that the brain can unscramble the words and that the individual who hears them will act in a way that he or she cannot understand. For example, a rock and roll group called Led Zeppelin included the following phrases played backwards in their song, Stairway to Heaven. Here's to my sweet Satan, I live for Satan, and the Lord turns me off. They don't say, but it appears as if the last statement is an attack on Christianity. And to show you that satanic rock and roll music does lead to violent acts, here's an article about the recently captured Night Stalker who allegedly killed 16 people. The article reads, Devil worship symbols left in homes of stalkers' victims. The back of the article says, pentagrams, 5-pointed stars associated with witchcraft and devil worship were painted on walls in the homes of some of the Night Stalker's victims. Ray Garcia, a former classmate of Ramirez's, said that Ramirez was obsessed with satanic themes in the rock band AC/DC's 1979 album, Highway to Hell. By the way, the name AC/DC means Antichrist, Devil's Children. Who killed those 16 people? Was it Ramirez or the record companies that hired the musicians, or the musicians who recorded those songs, or the radio station that played them, or all of them together? I believe all were accessories to those murders. Think for a moment why the record companies want to promote these songs. Gary Allen explained how this process works in a little pamphlet called That Music. He says, the youth believes it is rebelling against the establishment, yet the establishment owns and operates the radio and TV stations, the mass magazines, and the record companies that have made rock music into a powerful force in American life. The only conclusion that makes sense is that the establishment wants young people turned on to Satan worship. Why? Because it does two very important things. It helps destroy the family by alienating the child from his parents. Don't forget, one of Weishaupt's goals was to destroy the family. For instance, what would happen when a child comes home and says to his God-fearing parents, Hey, Mom and Dad, I am now a Satan worshiper. And secondly, it helps to turn children away from organized religion. In conclusion, I would like you to understand that it is not important to identify the individual conspirators or the various organizations involved in this conspiracy. Remember that one of the three ingredients of a conspiracy is that the conspirators must operate in secret. To stop this conspiracy, all that must be done is to expose the conspirators and reveal their plans. All that is necessary is for men and women of like thought to join together to inform the rest of the country while there is still time. But fortunately for us, there is already an organization that is exposing this conspiracy, and it has the necessary experience and the tools to educate those who will listen. That organization is the John Birch Society, now in its 27th year of existence. I would like to ask you to please listen to me very, very carefully. This is perhaps the most important statement I'll make in this cassette. In my book, I carefully detail the evidence that the master conspiracy that I've just detailed in part planned on imposing a dictatorship on this government, the American government, on July the 4th, 1976, during our bicentennial. Let me repeat that. The master conspiracy planned on imposing a dictatorship on the American government on July the 4th, 1976, during our bicentennial. This plan was conceived, I believe, over 200 years ago, and if they had succeeded, we would not be able to listen to this cassette tonight. If that is a new idea to you, I invite you to read my book for the incredible evidence that this statement is true. But their plans were postponed until a future date, one that I believe is very near. And it was the John Birch Society that convinced this conspiracy to alter their schedule by educating enough people. I have been a member of this society for 16 years, a fact that I am very proud of, and I will be a member as long as there is a John Birch Society. Now, if you are not a member because you do not want to get involved, let me remind you that you are involved whether you want to be or not. This conspiracy is out for you personally. They want to destroy your God-given rights, your family, your nation, your church or synagogue, your children, your parents. You are involved. Now, to further educate you about this conspiracy, I invite you to read and subscribe to a new magazine called The New American. It's a bi-monthly, means it comes out every 2 weeks, 64 pages long. The copy of the article, the cover that I have in front of me, goes back to November of 1985, and there's a picture of a Russian or somebody living in a slave labor camp in Russia, and the caption on the cover is "Slave Labor Goods from the Gulags," meaning the Gulag archipelagos that Alexander Solzhenitsyn wrote about a few years ago in his book by that name. Now, if you believe that you're getting the information about the Gulags from the major weeklies or bi-weeklies or monthlies of today's media, then you do not need this magazine. But if you agree with me that you're not getting the truth about these organizations and these concentration camps, then you need this magazine, because it is the only source of information about this conspiracy today. It's entitled The New American, and I would recommend that you subscribe to it. I urge you, join the John Birch Society as soon as you finish hearing this cassette. Let me end now with these last few thoughts. Years ago, I read this short statement, and I have personally accepted it as a challenge to me. It reads, "To be born a free man is an accident. To live a free man is a responsibility. And to die a free man is an obligation." Lastly, I would like to leave you with this brief poem. Now when our land to ruin's brink is verging, in God's name let us speak while there is time. Now when the padlocks for our lips are forging, silence is a crime. It is time to wake up, Leroy. Thank you so very, very much, and may God bless you all.